Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and hello to everyone who's listening, whichever part of the world you're listening in from. So today, as you guys were just discussing, Christoph, and about deployment of XR and people feeling comfortable in headsets and so on, it does dovetail very nicely into what I wanted to chat a little bit about today, which is some of the basics of a successful XR deployment. Building blocks, and I may be sharing some fairly basic and sometimes well-known information, but I think it's important too when you're coming back and you're wanting to have a successful program that you think about all the building blocks that it will take to have that. So the ABCs of strategy and the 1, 2, 3s of deployment, to keep it very simple. You have to really have both, to be honest, if you want to have a successful XR strategy. And when I think about a successful XR strategy, I think of it in terms of not just on the end consumer side, but of course on a business side. So if you're an enterprise or healthcare or other types of training programs where you want to introduce an XR strategy into your business and your company, or across a broader opportunity, there are a number of things that you should keep in mind when you're planning for that. Value proposition in terms of the strategy. When it comes to value proposition, thinking about what your goal is with your XR strategy. If your goal is training, for example, the types of programs that you choose and the types of experience that you're going to invest in on both the hardware and the content side, you need to think about what is going to make that both a reliable experience, something that's repeatable, which is probably one of the more important components, is the repeatability of something, and then how to re-educate someone with that particular experience. So for example, if you are using VR or AR for training, most likely you're training for a job that is already, people already know how to do it. So they've been trained one way, and you are using XR to train in a new way, a hopefully more effective way, but there will be a component of re-education that happens sometimes. And then understanding that when you're starting, before you've even deployed and before you've chosen the content that you're going to choose, think about the value proposition in these 3 R's. Through having triplets of something is always important. So reliable, repeatable, and re-education. And then on that same note is knowing your audience. If your audience, for example, is in one specific geographic location, it's probably going to be a little bit easier for you to pick that content and for you to deploy it in a successful way, because everybody will have the same parameters of knowledge and culture, most likely, or have some shared experience that already makes them a collective. It becomes a little bit more challenging if you're reaching across across time zones, across cultures, across geographies, which of course a lot of people have been doing. That's exactly what they have been doing right now when everybody's been home and dealing with quarantine. So in that same vein, thinking about how you keep your content mission focused, but also able to adopt across a broad range of people and their experiences and their time zones. And then scalability. Same thing, considering your audience, how long is it going to take for them to learn how to do this new experience in VR or AR? What are the time requirements for that? How many locations are involved? And what would be that other cultural impact? Now, this is a little bit more on the enterprise side of things. Obviously, it's a little bit different if you're talking to an end consumer. But when it comes to deployment of an internal strategy that you hope to have broader adoption, it's really critical to think of these 3 ABCs, if you will, in terms of your comprehensive strategy. Now, a successful deployment is really just kind of you putting your, I'm sorry that I put Legos on here, but I thought it very well showed how it really is. There are a number of different types of pieces. They can fit different ways. It's up to you to determine what your end goal is. If your end goal is to have, for example, everyone in your company have a VR meeting once a week, then that's how you will plan your infrastructure, and that will affect hardware as well as software, as well as how you roll that out and how you train somebody to enter that meeting. I can give you an example of so many different VR programs that I have tried in the last couple of months that have a range of ease, to be honest. And some of them are very difficult to, they'll either not only be available in one particular platform. So I can't use it on my Go, for example, but I can use it on my Oculus Quest. And that is something to think about as well, like how broad of an application is this particular thing that I want to share, right? So those are these building blocks of your successful deployment. Infrastructure and training, hygiene, safety, and logistics, which I think, Christophe, you just referenced as well. And then, of course, your operational planning. There's a little picture of a Cleanbox, which is my company. And of course, we address the hygiene component in XR. And one of our clients here in California and Los Angeles at Cedars-Sinai, Dr. Spiegel, talking about how they're using Cleanbox to decontaminate their headsets that they use for VR training. So again, this is all connected. That's your strategy. So you're problem solving through this strategic execution, which is one thing I think is really fantastic about virtual and augmented reality, is that you're able to execute things in a way that it's very different, but it's also it's connected to each other, but it's also connected internally to how a lot of people learn. And when you think about that, your strategy will play into how quickly people can adopt that and how quickly they actually gain knowledge from the program that you're deploying. So 3 things that I think are always very basic but essential: speed. And by speed, I mean speed to actual use of that particular strategy. So how quickly does it take to learn how to get in the program, for example? Not everybody has experienced VR. In fact, a lot of people have not. So if you are starting a new program in your company, and you will have to think about the fact that a lot of people experienced that environment before. So you think about the little things that sometimes sorry, my internet is a little bit, had an issue, apologize. But think about the things that sometimes you might think, oh, those are so simple. They're not always simple for everyone. So it does come down to thinking about the basics in your strategy. And then connected thought. How do you want to connect people? What is the outcome that you want from having an XR strategy? Because this is really, really critical. If you're trying to convey information from an employer to an employee, that is one particular strategy, but then that will also be colleague to colleague. And then of course, usually your goal is that individual output. How are you changing what that person might be able to do through the use of your XR program? So I'm going to give a little throwback to entertainment because I think it's a really, really good platform and industry from which really everybody in XR can benefit. And thinking about the lessons that you can learn from entertainment. I think the use of VR, like in location-based entertainment and other types of VR venues, is really the gateway to end consumer adoption, but also to commercial engagement. And a lot of that is because the familiarity. The more people you get to use a headset, put it on, try it, love it, want to try it again, want to do something different, the better success every other XR program has the opportunity to be. And that really comes down to a broad knowledge base in the general population. So think about lessons in entertainment, which I'll go through a couple of them that I think apply to any kind of XR use case. Lessons learned through mass use venues, also informing enterprise and healthcare adoption and standard operating procedure. So one of those things is tech as a second skin. Now, when you think of entertainment, you think of people go in, they go to either escape or to go to have an experience that makes them happy, something that they're comfortable with, something that they look forward to. And whatever that experience is, if it's going to Disneyland or if it's going, to LBVR, they're excited about it. So that means they feel comfortable in it. And you should always think of your technology in the sense of making it like your second skin. It should feel comfortable to be in. You should always feel comfortable either as your avatar, or you should feel comfortable in knowing how to navigate in that XR space. So again, this comes back to engagement. How are you going to keep your audience, whether it's your tech team or your boss or your employees or your patrons for your venue or your business? How are you going to keep them engaged? Because repeatability is critical to a successful XR deployment. That's really recurring revenue, right? You have to be able to repeat that, and you have to have people want to repeat that and want to re-engage over and over and over again. The more you get that, obviously, the broader adoption you will end up with. So some of the, of course, benefits of having tech as a second skin is you're getting that feedback from people. How do you feel about this? Because a better understanding of how they're actually feeling in that technology will give you better answers. Will this program be successful? Do I need to change something about it? Do I need to think ahead in my next deployment or my next content that I want to add for training or for education, depending on what that might be? How can I better this experience the next time? There's one thing that I like to refer back to is the livability, and that is a 10-minute live it. Like, if you're not going to live in something for 10 minutes, if you're not happy with doing that, you're not going to repeat it. So if there's any component about that XR experience that makes somebody just kind of want to bail after 5 minutes, then you probably need to rethink your strategy on some level, whether that be the hardware itself or the content or how that person is actually ready to engage in that experience. And then again, coming back to the user experience, which of course is critical, and that comes back to operations all the way to hygiene. Repeat, repeat, repeat. That's what you want, right? So every time you go through a new trial of a new program, for example, you need to understand before you start that how you intend to quantify those experiences, whether you're measuring with a measuring tape or an abacus. However you determine that you want to measure that, that will be important in determining whether or not you've developed the most successful opportunity for your XR program. So whatever your end goal is, start there and work backwards and determine what your benchmarks will be and how you intend to measure the success of that particular program. So the 1, 2, 3s, we did the ABCs, now the 1, 2, 3s. Back to the basics, thinking about targeting your users, who are your users? And again, we'll go back to a workplace experience. Let's say you have a group of 10 people in a workplace and you are wanting to deploy an XR strategy to retrain them or to train them something new about the job that they're doing. You have to think about your target users. There will be a range of ages. There'll be a range of background, whether that's educational background or experience background, and you need to define that quite specifically so that you can make sure that whatever you're using will apply to the broad range of people that will be using it. Again, when you're planning your XR strategy, plan to have training in place because some people will be doing this for the first time. Now, at some point, I believe, and I can't give you the timeline because I don't know what that might be. It could anybody's guess at this point. But at some point, it will most likely become as familiar to everybody else as it is to use an iPhone or an iPad or a tablet. I can tell you I have a niece and nephew that are ages 6 and 10, and they're very, very comfortable with an iPad and could guess the passwords at age 2. So they just became comfortable and familiar with it, where it might have taken somebody like my grandmother a little bit longer to do that. But at some point, this will become a little bit more second skin on a broader adoption. But in the meantime, thinking about how you need to understand the logistics of training people for that. And again, coming back to how you measure your success and what those benchmarks are. So as in every other program that's new, you have to just listen and observe. And sometimes if you've got it right the first time, congratulations, because it doesn't always happen. And sometimes you will have a successful first deployment and you might change your goals for the second deployment. You might decide that worked very well and now I want to move it on to this. But the goal is always to listen, observe, and adjust as needed. Your goals, again, connection of remote colleagues, team adoption, and then ultimately, I think for a lot of enterprises is taking you could be starting as a pilot program, but ultimately for the most success, you would want a more global corporate buy-in. And so again, coming back to having the appropriate building blocks in place and understanding how to benchmark those will be critical to convincing your boss or the person or the CFO or the person who authorizes that deployment that yes, this is actually a worthwhile investment. So this is where Hygiene comes in, and this is as important to a successful XR deployment as anything I've just talked about. I think at this point, I don't really have to talk about so much as shared contagions because we're all acutely aware of that, unfortunately. But you do think about the headset because it sits on your face. It is literally right here. Eyes, nose, mouth, head, hair. And believe it or not, some people are very, very acutely aware of that. And a lot of times they won't try it, even though they don't necessarily tell you that's why they won't try it. It becomes, though, it's a personal item. So you have to think about that in terms of how you want to have somebody comfortable wearing that headset. And I think you had referenced that before, how quickly will people feel comfortable with that? That's a very good point. And I think it will probably depend on what kind of experience you're talking about, whether that's a VR arcade, there will be some level of comfortability there, whether it's an internal program, might be a different benchmark at which point people feel comfortable using it. But one thing that they will never feel comfortable with is if that headset is wet or if it smells. Those are really critical points that I think I don't have to explain why that's the case. So thinking about that in terms of your hygiene strategy, what you've thought of, how you plan to not only protect people from contagion transfer, but also protect the hardware itself, because that is an investment. So that being said, obviously bacteria, viruses, skin, hair, sweat, smell, moisture, those are the headset problems that we are addressing. So coming back to my company, Cleanbox, we are a smart tech hygiene company. We use UVC light to decontaminate. We've been here since way before COVID. So we are not a new product. We've been on the market for a couple of years. We have multiple products on the market, but the key components of our technology are the use of UVC in an LED, an internal air system, and a nano coating that is a hydrophobic. And by that, I mean it's something that we provide with our product that will keep your textiles on your headset. If it's Velcro or fabric, it will make it a hydrophobic, so it will keep any kind of sweat or moisture at the surface so that it doesn't soak in and keep that headset wet from sweat. Sorry to talk about all this gross stuff, but that is kind of the point. You do have to talk about it, and you have to think about how you're going to prevent a problem before it's there to have a successful XR deployment. Viruses, how does UVC work? And this is a question that's kind of come up a lot because it's been in the news quite a bit. UV light, there's UVA, UVB, and UVC. And there are different wavelengths of light. So UVA and B are a little bit more like the sun, for example. UVC is a very different wavelength of light. It doesn't act the same way. It's a very short wavelength, and it does not exist naturally in the atmosphere. That's why it's very highly effective at eradicating viruses and bacteria. It deconstructs the DNA and RNA strands. And that's important because when you think about how you really want to best protect a person, you want to provide both the theatrics of cleaning so that they know that something's been done and that you care and you're concerned and you are being responsible, but they also want to know that it's actually clean. That's just as important, and I think those two tie hand in hand. So when you're going back to a successful XR deployment, especially in a post-COVID-19 world, you will want to have planned both in parallel to each other. Now, specific to our company, we have been able to undergo COVID-19 testing. We've done that at a biohazard level 3 lab here in the United States. We actually have a product that decontaminates masks. That was one of our COVID-19 responses that we pivoted and created a product in about a month, and we have now on the market. So we've tested it against both our current existing products as well as on masks which are much harder to clean because they're fabrics and textiles. And we are able to reach these levels of decontamination against COVID-19. So again, this is just a quick summary. I don't have to go through it again. This is basically how UVC light works. Now, one thing that is important with the use of UVC light, and then also any kind of hygiene protocol in general, is that you try to eliminate as much human error as possible. One thing that's a challenge, especially with wipes, for example, alcohol wipes or other kind of antibacterial wipes, is that their use is highly dependent on a person's ability to do it thoroughly. And as we've learned, it seems like that is sometimes a challenge. You know, also with alcohol wipes, you need to leave it wet for 4 minutes before it actually has the same level of efficacy that you're expecting. So these are challenges when it comes to human error that we try to eliminate for a successful XR deployment. I will move past this, but again, alcohol works if you leave it wet on a hard surface for 4 minutes. It does not work on soft surfaces, unfortunately. And of course, covers, those are great when you want to help prevent sweat and any kinds of makeup, etc. But they also obviously don't decontaminate. They are more of a barrier. I probably don't need to throw in this slide here, but basically it's very clear that businesses are looking for hygiene solutions and will actually need them in order to redeploy. So again, quickly, we use UVC light in an LED. I will mention one thing about that is that UVC has been used in healthcare systems for decades. So it's a known technology. It is relatively new using it in an LED. And what that does is it removes the mercury component. It's not in a bulb, so there are no toxins. So it's a completely environmentally friendly way to decontaminate. A little bit more about the company. I don't want to go too much just on our product, but we do have products for 1 headset, for 2 headsets, 4 headsets at once. I don't think I mentioned this is a 60-second cycle. So in 1 minute, we reach logs 4 and 5 decontamination against bacteria and viruses. And that means 99.99+% decontamination. This is one for our masks. And then, of course, all of our product is stackable, modular, has locking capabilities, and USB and USB-C charging functionalities. Just an example of some of our clients, we work in a lot of industries: entertainment, healthcare, education, and training. So some of our clients here. And as you can see, you can build our products into whatever your existing real estate is. This is Pacific Science Center in the state of Washington in the United States. And they've built the Cleanboxes into the wall. Hologate, this is one of our clients, I think in California. This is an interesting one because I think this is, again, going back to entertainment being a great gateway for other types of XR strategies. This particular venue, they make a big deal about showing their customers how they clean. So they go through a whole process and say, hey, here's what we do, and then we put in a Cleanbox, and then here's how you can feel confident, and here's how you can feel comfortable. And they've been polling their customers, and they've seen at least 59% of their customers they come back, there's a repeat engagement. Partially, 59% of them are saying that hygiene has something to do with that repeat engagement. They're coming back because they feel comfortable enough to come back. This is another one of our clients, Black Box Gym. I think that they're in a few locations in the United States. They're a VR gym. Obviously, hygiene is even more of an issue there because you don't want a smelly, sweaty headset after someone has just worked out. A few of our other customers in LBEs and LBVRs. And that's all I have for you today. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. I mean, this
My pleasure.
The problems we are also dealing here in SSVAR, and particularly before even the COVID-19 pandemic, we have such kind of problems with wet equipment. For example, we are working with disabled people, and they are not too much afraid from viruses or contamination, but they really don't like to have this wet stuff.
Yes. Well, it comes back to the comfortability factor, right? They want to be immersed. I mean, that is kind of what XR is. You're immersed in a new world, and it's hard to have full immersion if you have, distractions from hygiene. If you can smell your headset, you're not gonna want to put it on, and you're certainly not going to feel like you're in a new world that way. So what are some of the other challenges that you guys are, I guess that's a very general question, but other challenges that you have and you're anticipating either pre-COVID or they were already there, or you think might be a little bit more difficult now?
Yes, actually, I also want to ask you about the challenge, I guess, is for every business, is because our user and our customers are not the same person. I mean, the user is those who use the headset, but the customer is those who pay. And we usually test our soft with the customers. That means CEOs or decision-making personnel of the company. And those guys are not really very familiar with this kind of equipment, and that's why we have always challenged to convince them that this is useful. So
Yeah.
how you do in your business with this problem?
Well, I think it comes down to a couple of things, and you're absolutely right. That is a big challenge for a lot of companies. Is that you're trying to convince the person who's writing the check or paying the wire transfer that this is really what is there's going to be a return on their investment. That is ultimately what every person who's a CFO will want to know. And then I think so hygiene is one of those components. And if you go back to building your entire strategy and thinking about kind of what I just discussed with your strategy and your deployment plan, if you have that plan in place and then you have those benchmarks at which you say, hey, we're measuring engagement this way, and then we're going to see, let's just say, call it a training program, because enterprise, so you've trained somebody on this, and then you can go and say, hey, this person learned at this more accelerated rate, for example. Let's make that our benchmark. And you can go back and say, here's our deployment strategy. Here's how we're going to check in to make sure it's working. Here's how we plan to adjust if there's something that needs to be adjusted. And then it makes a much stronger case for that person to say, I might not be familiar with this technology myself, but I can clearly see that there's a plan for success. And I think that that's the most important.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I believe we have been wrong in our approach just to make demonstration and give this equipment to these guys. It probably makes sense to go more to the presentation of our activity, to presentation of what we are doing, to assure them. Okay, thank you very much again.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me today.